2, 1. Sir, we are live.
Should I start, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am, you can start.
Yes, Rashmi, you can start.
Good evening, everyone. I welcome you to this meeting today to learn about this new drug, tofacitinib, that is currently in the news everywhere. We have two stalwarts with us to give us information about this new medicine. I now invite Dr. Amit Kelkar, our moderator for the evening, to conduct the meeting.
A very good evening to all of y'all. We are going straight ahead with the meeting. Well, till these many days, we used to treat psoriasis, atopic dermatitis, and alopecia areata with some non-specific broad immunosuppressants, which had got very highly variable responses, and they did not give desired results every time. But with the recent advances in genetic techniques and the immunological assays, now is an era of targeted therapies, where we use small molecules which block specific pathways. So we are going to learn about similar such molecule today. Well, today we have our esteemed panelists. We first have Dr. Aniruddha Tembe from Pune. He's done his MD medicine and his clinical fellowship in rheumatology from Singapore. He's trained at the Hinduja Hospital, and he's a rheumatologist at Dinanath Mangeshkar Hospital and Aditya Birla Hospital. He has used this molecule a lot in his orthopedic and his rheumatology practice. So he's got the first-hand knowledge about this. So we are going to learn many things from him today. And the second speaker we have is our own dermatologist, Dr. Sushil Tehlani sir from Mumbai. He's an MD and DVD, and he's very familiar with all of us. So we will begin with the first lecture. I invite Dr. Aniruddha Tembe to please give his talk, sir. Sir, I'll stop my screen sharing. You can start yours, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Kelkar, for that kind introduction. I hope I am audible.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Dhanashree Bhide Madam and the entire faculty organizers of the Pune chapter of Indian Dermatology Association to give me this honor and opportunity to interact with you all. Now, these are very exciting times in the field of rheumatology, so much so that we get to review a blockbuster molecule almost on a yearly basis. This has never been the case, especially with laid back branches like rheumatology. I remember when I joined rheumatology about 2 decades ago, I used to wonder what will I offer to my patients, because that was the era of just NSAIDs, some steroids, and some methotrexate here and there. But things have changed dramatically in the last 5 years or so, and we are getting newer and newer drugs added to our armamentarium, which will definitely help improve the care of our patients with rheumatic illnesses and also the dermatology illnesses. As you can see in this evolution, because I'll keep the prototypical disease as psoriasis, since this is the disease where we get to interact most with our dermatology colleagues. And you have gone through this history yourself, how the treatment for psoriatic arthritis has evolved over the past 2 decades.
We can't see your screen,
Dr.
sir.
Tembe, sorry, have you shared your screen?
Yes.
We can't see that.
1 second.
Yeah, now it is visible. I think you have to put it in a full screen mode. Yeah.
Yes. So in the next 20 to 25 minutes or so, my focus will be to discuss the JAK inhibitors in general and tofacitinib in particular, focusing on the molecular pharmacology and mainly the monitoring aspect, whereas the efficacy aspect will be discussed in the second lecture following mine. And the last few slides to deal with this unprecedented COVID pandemic, do we have something different to offer? And does our choice of agent will change during this pandemic? So far, tofacitinib has been approved by FDA for the management of rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, ulcerative colitis, and juvenile idiopathic arthritis. These are well approved indications. But apart from these FDA approved indications, there are some off-label but promising indications. And these are some indications where I've used this molecule myself and found promising results, but they are as yet not FDA approved, but there is a pilot trial going on simultaneously in many countries. And that is ankylosing spondylitis, dermatomyositis. Here I would like to make a mention that the cutaneous aspect of dermatomyositis, especially the juvenile dermatomyositis, responds superbly to this molecule. I have seen patients who have grade 0 to grade 1 PAR regaining grade 4 PAR in about 6 to 8 weeks time. So this is one promising area where the molecule needs to be researched better, and a whole lot of dermatological conditions which will be discussed in the second half. Yeah. So I need not tell you about psoriasis, you know it better than me. Psoriasis is not just a joint or a skin disease. It has the potential to involve the eye, and we all know very high incidence of metabolic syndrome associated with psoriatic disease, which increases the risk of cardiovascular morbidity and mortality in our group of patients. So with this highly heterogeneous disease, the onus is on us to diagnose it early, to treat it effectively so as to prevent long-term morbidities and some mortality also. As you can see in this graph, delay in diagnosis of psoriatic arthritis. In this case, I think the onus lies on the dermatologist to actively ask about the articular symptoms when the patient presents to them with fulminant skin disease, or for that matter, even minor skin disease, positively asking for any kind of articular symptoms. Because as we can see in these long-term trials, any delay of as low as 6 months can increase the incidence of erosions, arthritis mutilans, and functional disability of the patient. So with this whole group of potent molecules which are available to us, which can definitely improve the quality of life of our patients, the onus is on us as dermatologists and rheumatologists to diagnose these conditions early, to assess the severity, and to start appropriate and potent treatment as early as possible. So as we have seen in the evolution, the decade of 1990 belonged to conventional synthetic DMARDs, as they are now called. The prototypical drug is methotrexate. It was approved way back in 1990 because of its general efficacy, which was shown in rheumatoid arthritis. We all have used this drug. It's a wonderful drug. It does wonders to our patient, but even today, we do not know how methotrexate exactly works in our patients with RA or for that matter, psoriasis. As opposed to this, now we have the targeted synthetic DMARDs, the molecule that we are discussing today, tofacitinib. It was specifically designed to target a particular inflammatory process, and so it has well-defined and well-understood mechanisms of action. So in between the traditional synthetic DMARDs, which got introduced in the 1990s, and the targeted synthetic DMARDs, which have been introduced recently, was the era of biologics. So as you can see in this graph, the earliest treatment was just symptomatic with NSAIDs, followed by drugs like methotrexate. Then the era of 2000, the early 21st century, which belonged to biologics with the advent of TNF blockers. Then I think the most important advance in the field of psoriasis came with the introduction of IL-17 and 23 blockers, especially secukinumab, which gave such tremendous results, aiming for PASI more than 100, that it changed the whole landscape of treatment. And in the last 5 decades or so, now we have this group of small molecules, the JAK inhibitors, which is the focus of discussion today. But before we discuss small molecules, we need to know the difference between the biological agents and the JAK inhibitors which we'll be using, because this is going to define how we use our patients, whether we give them biologics or we give them JAK inhibitors. I think this is the most important question when we see patients in our clinic. Who's a better candidate for every patient? So we know biologics are large molecular weight proteins. As opposed to that, these JAK inhibitors are organic small molecules. Because of their high molecular weight, the biologics have to be given parenterally. Their mechanism of action is extracellular. They have well-defined cytokine or cell targets. As opposed to that, the JAK inhibitors are organic small molecules which act intracellularly by inhibiting certain well-defined enzymes. And because they are small molecules and because they are chemicals in nature, they are a lot more stable than the biologics. And this impacts the manufacturing cost. The biologics require very high manufacturing costs as opposed to the small molecules which can be manufactured at a very economical cost. But to me, the difference that really defines my practice is the immunogenicity. Now, immunogenicity is defined as the ability of a particular substance, such as an antigen or epitope, to provoke a humoral or a cell-mediated immune response. The wanted immunogenicity is the response which a vaccine elicits in a human body against well-defined pathogens like viruses or bacteria. But it becomes unwanted when the host mounts an immune response against a therapeutic antigen like a recombinant protein or a monoclonal antibody. This unwanted immunogenicity can create problems. Now, this kind of unwanted immunogenicity has two major problems in our patients. One is the development of neutralizing antibodies, which can reduce the effect of the therapeutic drug. And the second, because of these anti-drug antibodies, it increases the risk of infusion reactions and can also cause delay type hypersensitivity reactions. Now, to me, this is one important factor which helps me to choose small molecules above biologics, because in our country, cost is always the defining factor. And we all know, and we all have done that. Most of the time, we don't want to do it, but we have used biologics on an SOS basis, which is a dangerous precedent. Patient comes to us with severe pain or a severe flare of skin psoriasis. The patient doesn't have enough money. We give the drug for about 3 to 6 months, induce a short-term remission and stop the drug. So when you use biologics like in this fashion, like a hit and run fashion, it increases the risk of immunogenicity in the host. And we have all seen this in the first agent which was introduced, which was infliximab. Infliximab has a very high incidence of immunogenicity, very high incidence of anti-drug antibodies, so much so that the patient just cannot get the same response as he got with the first infusion. So this problem will remain in Indian scenario where the patients will use these biologics on an SOS basis just to cut down the cost. Now, this was a long-term study wherein they tried to study the development of anti-drug antibodies among TNF blockers. And as you can see, almost 30% of patients on adalimumab, about 25% about 22 to 30% on infliximab do develop anti-drug antibodies within 6 months of starting the treatment. Among the biologics, etanercept has the lowest incidence of anti-drug antibodies. So herein I feel that the small molecule scores over biologic, because being a chemical, it is mostly non-immunogenic and does not have the problems of immunogenicity that is encountered with the biological agents. So this sets the platform for the JAK-STAT pathway, why we needed these molecules when we had such potent biologics with in our armamentarium. Now, biologics which are there in the market, they are targeted against specific cell or cytokine, but most of them act extracellularly. As opposed to this, this is how the biologics act. They will attach to the receptor and then they will initiate a series of reactions, which includes transduction followed by a translation, that is the manufacture of certain cytosolic proteins, which are important for the cell function. Now, rather than acting extracellularly, the focus of research about 10 years ago shifted to intracellular mechanisms, because it was realized that biologics, although they are very targeted, just target a single cytokine or a cell, but they have not managed to induce the kind of long-term remission that we would have hoped for. So again, the focus shifted back to blocking multiple cytokines. The only way to do that safely was to target an intracellular pathway. And one of these pathways is the JAK-STAT pathway. JAK-STAT system involves four main proteins, JAK1, JAK2, JAK3, and TYK2. We need to know these functions because most of the adverse events that we'll encounter in our practice are a consequence of the blocking of these physiological functions. Here I would like to make a mention of JAK2. Here it is involved in erythropoiesis and myelopoiesis, and if this JAK2 gets blocked significantly, that can lead to anemia, neutropenias, the cytopenias which are encountered while treatment with JAK-STAT inhibitors. So the prototypical drug or the topic of discussion is tofacitinib. I don't want to go into the details of how it works, but to briefly mention, it prevents the dimerization of JAKs, and then it prevents the transfer of signals from JAK to STAT, and finally the gene transcription. As we can see from the physiological effects of JAKs, it is important that we have selective JAK inhibitors. The one that we are discussing today is tofacitinib. It is a selective JAK3, JAK1 inhibitor, very minimal action at JAK2, but historically it has been called the pan-JAK inhibitor. Lot more selective JAK inhibitors are baricitinib, upadacitinib, and filgotinib. Filgotinib is a highly JAK1 selective inhibitor. Now, why does it matter? Because each of these JAKs are involved in mediating some particular cell function, and by blocking well-defined JAKs, what we want is the desired response and to minimize the undesired response, as we shall see later. Now, just to briefly mention this point, when biologics were introduced about 2 decades ago, they were considered highly targeted therapy, just targeting the initial ones for the TNF blockers, which were targeting only the TNF alpha. Then we had the IL-6 blockers, the anti-B cell agents. Now suddenly the focus, when it has shifted back to JAKs, now JAKs, as you can see, a whole lot of cytokines, their action will get blocked by one or the other JAKs. Now this will result in blocking of multiple cytokines. So when it was first introduced in the market about a decade ago, I had my reservations, because by blocking so many cytokines, are we increasing the risk of adverse events? Fortunately, the clinical studies have not shown this to be true. I can vouch for this, that tofacitinib is one of the best studied drugs so far as clinical trials are concerned, because the trials with tofacitinib have run as long as 8 years, which is very rare. Most of the trials so far range from 6 months to 2 years, max of 2 years. Nobody has crossed that boundary, but tofacitinib, we should give the whole credit to Pfizer for continuing the monitoring for as long as 8 years. As you can see, the kind of trials they were done. Tofacitinib was compared as monotherapy to placebo. Tofacitinib was given to patients who were methotrexate inadequate responders. Then they were given to patients who were TNF alpha inadequate responders, either used alone as monotherapy or used with methotrexate or the other DMARD. So a whole lot of combinations have been tried, and this is the only drug which has been compared head to head with one of the TNF alpha inhibitors, which is adalimumab. So we have long-term data. So there is sufficient information available to us which can help us to make a decision. And as I said, long-term data means over a period of about 8 years, what they have seen is sustained efficacy. Unlike psoriasis, where you make use of PASI scores, in rheumatoid, there is the ACR 70 criteria. And what is heartening to see is even after a period, even after using it continuously for about 9 months, the efficacy is sustained. It doesn't go down. That shows that immunogenicity does not play a role in reducing the response to this drug, which is not the case that is seen with biologics. In the long-term safety data, what comes out as a highlight is the incidence of herpes zoster, which clearly came out as one of the important infections to be watched out for in patients with tofacitinib, very high incidence of herpes zoster. But otherwise, as you can see, in about 20,000 patient years, the incidence of serious infections has been as low as 2.7. Herpes zoster was high. Other opportunistic infections were not that high. TB was quite low, and mortality was minimal. The incidence of malignancies also acceptable as compared to other biologics and the general population. So nothing that stands out. So when we give drugs like tofacitinib, what to monitor? Now these are the effects which are expected based on its physiological actions. So all JAK inhibitors will lead to a reduction in lymphocyte numbers. So they will all lead to lymphopenia, reduction in NK cell number, neutrophil numbers, hemoglobin drops, platelet drops. There might be a rise in transaminase. CPK level, interestingly, can go up. Now this is interesting because, as I said, I have used tofacitinib in dermatomyositis. Initially, there might be a small rise in CPK level, but that does not translate into clinical deterioration. Similarly, the creatinine level goes up, but it's not of the level of cyclosporin or NSAIDs. The range is about 0.1 milligram per deciliter over a period of few years. So you don't see a dramatic increase in creatinine level. So anything less than 30% from the baseline is acceptable. But if you do encounter something like a more than 50% rise from the baseline, then it is a sign of concern. You should stop the drug and evaluate what is the cause. Now, as you can see from these head-to-head comparison of all the JAK inhibitors, filgotinib stands out in that it is the only drug which causes a rise in hemoglobin. Now, I am involved as a principal investigator in one of the trials for filgotinib, and this is a dramatic response. As in tofacitinib, we do see some amount of anemia, neutropenia, lymphopenia, but none of this happens when we are using filgotinib. But it is a concern, the cytopenias and the other things. Similarly, we do see a rise in HDL and LDL levels, but the HDL and LDL rise proportionately, so it does not increase the risk of cardiovascular morbidity or mortality. And these drops in cytopenias or a rise in liver transaminase levels, it does not continue in a linear fashion. It usually plateaus off after about 2 to 3 months of use. So you may initially 2 to 3 months, you may see a drop in the cell counts or a rise in transaminases, but that will plateau at around 3 months, and subsequently you should not see further decline in any of these parameters. So similarly with the lipid parameters, this is something that we have encountered with the use of biologics, especially tocilizumab, which can increase the LDL out of proportion to HDL, but that kind of rise does not happen with tofacitinib. Tofacitinib causes a proportional rise in HDL and LDL. So the HDL and LDL ratios remain the same, and so it does not increase the cardiovascular morbidity or mortality. Now this was a concern, that the risk of DVT and pulmonary embolism. Now this is most of the side effects or the adverse event that we have discussed so far can be predicted from its physiological functions. But this is one aspect which is unexplained. We don't know why DVT happens when these patients are put on JAK inhibitors, but DVT and pulmonary embolism, which can sometimes be fatal, have been reported in patients who have been taking tofacitinib and baricitinib. So this is a cause for concern, and a proper screening should be done before we put our patients on these drugs. But just to add to this part, tofacitinib has been tried in patients with SLE and antiphospholipid syndrome. So it's not a contraindication, but you have to keep a watch on this. Now coming to pregnancy part. Now this to me is very important because most of our patients are young, especially patients with RA. They're quite young. It's a disease of young females, and fertility is one of the major reasons why we switch over to these kind of therapies. But tofacitinib, being a small molecule, has the potential to cross the placenta. It does reduce the number of viable animal fetuses when they are exposed to tofacitinib. And out of 47 accidental pregnancies, while these patients were on tofacitinib, either they were patients with RA or psoriasis, out of 47, 25 were healthy newborns. There was nil fetal death, but 8 spontaneous abortions, 8 were medical terminations, and 1 had congenital malformation. Because of this, it's a class D indication for pregnancy. Should not be used during pregnancy, should not be used during lactation. In fact, breastfeeding is not recommended during treatment and for at least 18 hours after the last dose of Xeljanz. This last point to me is a major concern. And Dr. Dhanashree Bhide madam specifically asked me to mention the red flags which you feel. This to me is an area of concern. As I just said that I am involved as a principal investigator in one of the trials on filgotinib, and you will be surprised to know that this trial is only being conducted to assess the fertility issues in these patients, and this involves 3 monthly semen analysis. So there is a red flag. The manufacturers know that there is some issue with the fertility. It can reduce male and female fertility. Although there is no concrete data, there is no contraindication, but I will personally like to avoid in males or females who are thinking of starting a family in recent future. So I just said a summary of the adverse events. Most of the adverse events can be predicted as a consequence of blocking the physiological function of JAKs. So cytopenias, transaminitis, subtle rise in creatinine is what is expected, but what is unexpected is the incidence of DVT and PE, the teratogenicity, and a decreased male or female fertility. Here I would mention that biologics definitely score above small molecules because biologics are absolutely safe during pregnancy. Most of the TNF blockers can be continued up to the second trimester. They can be safely continued during lactation. So if you want a drug to be safe during pregnancy and lactation period, biologics are definitely superior to these JAK inhibitors. So before we start our patients on biologics, we do some screening tests. So there was a survey. I don't know how you all do it for psoriasis patient, but most of us would like to screen for blood-borne viral infections like Hep B, Hep C, HIV, and the most important is latent TB. There's nothing different. I think you need to follow the same guidelines as you are following for before you put your patients on secukinumab or the TNF blockers. You get a baseline chest X-ray, MAN2 test, and a TB quantiferon gold. If either of them are positive, if TB gold or MAN2 tests are positive and the chest radiograph is negative for active TB, then you label these patients and having as latent TB. And if there is active TB, obviously you first treat the active tuberculosis and then only think of starting this drug. For latent TB, the drug of choice is isoniazid for 9 months. Because it is metabolized by cytochrome enzymes, rifampicin is contraindicated along with tofacitinib. It's going to negate the efficacy of tofacitinib. So for the treatment of latent TB, if you're planning to put your patients on tofacitinib, the recommended regimen is 9 months of isoniazid along with pyridoxine. Now, there is quite a lot of variation in how to screen for latent TB, but we in India more or less have come to some conclusion that how to do it. Do all things in clinical examination, MAN2 test, TB gold, and a chest X-ray, and based on the findings, you make a diagnosis of latent TB or not and treat accordingly. So after having decided to treat our patients, we start with the treatment. This drug can be given with or without food. Important to tell the patient to swallow the whole tablet. Do
Hello.
Hello.
Is there a
Is
problem?
there any issue or problem with
I
connectivity?
think he's come back. He's come back.
He's come back now. He's muted.
He's
I think.
muted.
Yeah.
Temperature is muted.
His connection is lost, I think.
Hmm.
Can you unmute him?
Yeah, unmute he will do himself, but he has lost his connectivity.
Yes.
Wait for a minute. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's starting.
Dr. Tembe, please unmute yourself.
Sir, you can share your screen now.
Yeah, am I audible again?
Yes, sir. You're audible, but you're not visible. Now it's visible, sir. You can just make it as a full screen. Sir, full screen करता है?
I think we have
He's
lost
gone.
him again. Yeah.
Yes.
Should I call him?
You can call him on the mobile ones, ma'am.
Yeah.
Would be better. Well, guess what? We are learning so much about JAK inhibitors today. And till date, we only know two JAKs. We knew the Jack and Jill who went up the hill, and the Jack Sparrow, Johnny Depp from the Pirates of the Caribbean. So we are learning so much about the third Jack today.
He's back again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we cannot share the screen, last few points you can actually speak up, no?
Yes.
I think so, yeah.
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 So if somebody could talk to him.
I will just call him.
Or he can just share the screen, ma'am, and he need not be the full screen. He can just share the slides which are there. So,
I will just talk to him.
okay, ma'am.
Dr. Tembe.
Nothing else. Okay. But I'm audible.
Yeah, you are audible, sir.
Okay.
Now it is seen.
Now it's visible.
Sorry for the interruption. So as you can see the dosing part, the recommended dose is 5 milligram BD. But in ulcerative colitis, we can use a higher dose of 10 milligram BD. But there has been a significant increase in the risk of adverse reactions on the higher dose.
Again, we have lost his vocal.
Yeah.
Is it a platform or a problem from his side?
Can technical team help him, or it's a problem with his net connection? Hexicon, can you just tell
Ma'am,
me what is it?
Ma'am,
Yeah.
it's a SIR problem, network
Huh.
connection.
Oh,
From his
network
side.
connection.
Sir, please unmute yourself, Tembe sir. Yeah.
So if actually he has a poor connection, he can talk without the
Yes,
slides. It will be.
I'm audible again.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're since tofacitinib is metabolized by the same enzymes which metabolize many other drugs, it is important to use it cautiously when you're giving either fluconazole or itraconazole to your patients. Rifampicin is definitely contraindicated when you're giving tofacitinib because it definitely reduces the drug levels of tofacitinib. The same is the risk with other drugs, and that is why as a combination therapy, it should not be used in along with azathioprine or cyclosporin. In RA, tofacitinib is recommended either as monotherapy or in combination with methotrexate. Surprisingly, in psoriatic arthritis, tofacitinib has not been used as a monotherapy. It should always be used in combination with the traditional DMARDs like methotrexate. That is how the trials are. You can still go for monotherapy, but this is how the trials have been conducted in psoriasis or psoriatic arthritis. And certainly it should not be combined with other biologics like TNF blockers or secukinumab. So this is a short way of how to monitor patients doing regular hemogram, lipids, liver enzymes, and to hold the drug if the lymphocyte count drops below 500 or the absolute neutrophil count drops below 1000 or the hemoglobin drops below 9 or if there is severe hepatic impairment. But I would like to mention here tofacitinib is safe in patients with mild to moderate hepatic impairment and also safe in patients with mild to moderate renal impairment. Of course, the severe forms, you should be avoiding this drug. Coming to the last part, does our choice change with the COVID pandemic? Now, in desperate situations like COVID, we all know that the predominant pathophysiology in COVID is immune-mediated destruction of the lung parenchyma rather than the direct cytopathic effects of the virus. So a whole lot of immunomodulators and immunosuppressive therapy has been tried in COVID. Similarly is the use of JAK inhibitors. All of them have been tried for the treatment of COVID. Recently, there was this trial which was published in NEJM where they have combined baricitinib with remdesivir for all hospitalized patients with COVID-19 and they have reported good results. But mind you, this trial was for baricitinib and not tofacitinib. So I'm not recommending tofacitinib as a treatment for COVID-19. Here what they have said is baricitinib not only acts as an immunomodulator, but also prevents the entry of the virus into the cell. So it has some different action from the other JAK inhibitors. But this is important to me. Most of the biologics have a very long half-life in the range of weeks. As opposed to that, these small molecules have a very short half-life. Tofacitinib has a half-life of just 3 hours. And so if you immediately discontinue the drug, if unfortunately your patient gets a COVID infection, if you stop the drug, the effect of the drug will be washed away within 24 hours. And hopefully the patient will not have long-term immunosuppression due to this drug. So it is, you can use tofacitinib during these trying times of COVID-19. It's not a contraindication. You can, if it is clinically indicated, you can go ahead. So coming to the last slide, yesterday during a mock session, Dr. Pradyumna wanted me to hammer this thing that it is not a mild drug and should be carefully chosen. I hope I have done my job of scaring you all. It's a wonderful and a long-awaited drug, but definitely requires careful monitoring. It has its own risk of side effects, but if used well in properly indicated patients, it's a wonderful drug, and it definitely improves the quality of life in our group of patients. Thank you, and thank you for all the. I'm sorry for the disturbance which happened.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tembe, for giving so much knowledge about this new molecule and some solid take-home messages. Well, just to summarize it, it's actually we are dealing with these small molecules which actually act intracellularly before the cell starts behaving erratic and producing a number of cytokines. So I guess it's like a bow and arrow thing. Like if I have got a bow and arrow with me, so before I release that arrow, this is where the tofacitinib acts, and once it is released, where your TNF alpha is released, interleukins, this is where your other biologicals are. So probably it acts at the root cause. Well, thank you, sir, so much for your experience. And now we have Dr. Sushil Tahiliani, sir. Well, what to say about sir? He's one person who can speak with authority on lasers to nails to hair to biologics to clinical dermat. So now we are going to listen to him from the dermatologist point of view about this new molecule. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. We have to stop sharing, then I can probably, yeah. Now there we are.
Yeah, we will be having a question and answer session after Tahiliani sir's talk. So those who have got any questions, keep on sending them. We will take them.
So I'll be
Over
talking
to you,
about the JAK inhibitors in dermatology. Now, when I heard Amit, we are lucky we passed before all this had to be answered. So these are the various signals which come onto the cell surface, attached to receptors, triggering an intracellular signaling system, which leads to transcription of the DNA, and that's how you have various effects. Out of these, one is the cytokine superfamily, which acts through the JAKs. So imagine if we had to remember so many more things, there would be MD only for this subject. So JAK-STAT pathway, as we heard, is an intracellular pathway widely used by the members of cytokine receptor superfamily. It's most important in immune system cells. You know, this is important everywhere, but it has maximum effect on the immune system cells and hematopoietic cells, where we heard the JAK2 are more important. A previous speaker told us about it. The genus kinases are cytoplasmic tyrosine kinases that participate in signaling from a variety of cell surface receptors. And we know there are 4 mammalian JAKs, 1, 2, 3, and tyrosine kinase 2. And STAT is the actual transcription factor, which interacts through the JAK and then enters the nuclei. And there are 7 STAT proteins. And just a little bit about how without the signal, the two JAKs are away from each other. Once the signal is given to the extracellular domain of the receptor, these receptors come together, JAKs get attached to the receptor, then JAKs get phosphorylated. After phosphorylation, they cause phosphorylation of the intracellular tips of the receptors, following which this attracts the STATs, and then STATs get phosphorylated. After the STATs get phosphorylated, these STATs leave the receptors, form a dimer, and enter the nucleus, and that's how the transcription happens. And if you are interested, there's an interesting video for the same. If you allow me, I'll play it.
The Janus kinase, or JAK protein family, consists of JAK1, JAK2, JAK3, and tyrosine kinase 2, TYK2. They interact with the intracellular portion of cytokine receptors and play an important role in the signal transduction pathways for multiple cytokines, including pro-inflammatory cytokines such as interleukin-2, IL-2, IL-4, IL-7, IL-9, IL-13, IL-15, IL-17, IL-21. JAK proteins are associated with distinct cytokine receptors, but initiate their transcription response via common intracellular signaling pathways. Physiologically, a cytokine binding to its specific cell surface receptor initiates a conformational change in the receptor that in turn leads to recruitment and activation of the associated JAKs. Activated JAKs then phosphorylate specific residues on the intracellular domains of the cytokine receptor, which serve as docking sites for associated STAT proteins. Upon docking, the activated receptor-associated JAKs phosphorylate STATs. The phosphorylated STATs then dissociate from the receptor chains, dimerize with each other, and translocate to the cell nucleus, where they activate gene transcription. Understanding of this vital JAK-STAT signal transduction pathway has led to the development of orally administered small molecule JAK inhibitor of JAK and prevent its activation, thereby preventing STAT phosphorylation and translocation to the nucleus to activate gene transcription. The Janus kinase.
So the relevance of the Janus kinase inhibitors is its immunologically mediated skin diseases are characterized by significant local and systemic inflammation. And this is largely mediated by JAK signal transduction and activator transcription pathway. And these inhibitors that we use nowadays are a new addition in the armamentarium of the drugs in the treatment of such dermatosis. As we knew from the previous speaker, these are the US FDA approved indications for the tofacitinib. But through studies, the randomized controlled trials have shown promising results in alopecia areata, psoriasis, atopic dermatitis, and vitiligo. Besides, there's evolving evidence of efficacy in dermatomyositis, chronic actinic dermatitis, lupus erythematosus, cutaneous graft versus host disease reaction, aperoeosinophilic syndrome, erythema multiforme, and others. These others are through preclinical data. And these others, imagine, will be allergic contact dermatitis, pyoderma gangrenosum, eosin-related disorders, interface dermatitis like lichen planus. So just imagine how the indications may evolve in future. And currently, there are more than 25 clinical trials in different countries evaluating the JAK inhibitors in various dermatological conditions. Coming to the places, diseases where we have more evidence, JAK inhibitors and vitiligo. It causes we know there's a targeted destruction of melanocytes in vitiligo, and interferon gamma plays a central role in disease pathogenesis. Interferon gamma signaling utilizes JAK-STAT pathway. Hence, vitiligo may respond to treatment with JAK inhibitors. Tofacitinib and ruxolitinib have been tried in vitiligo, and topical tofacitinib and ruxolitinib also have been tried. Intrinsic or exogenic factors induce cellular stress response in melanocytes, which activates innate immunity within the cell skin in the skin. This triggers initial inflammation, which leads to autoimmunity. As a result of this, chemokines like CXL9 and CXL10 are released, and these recruit CD8 positive T cells. And these T cells produce interferon gamma, which triggers more CXCL and CXCL10. And also the CD8 T cells destroy melanocytes, and this leads to depigmentation. So I don't think I have to repeat it. I'll just show you through this image that there's first release of CXCL9 and 10, which cause recruitment of interferon, which attaches to the JAK, triggers JAK by attaching to the CD8 positive cells, which get activated. They're recruited. They cause more release of interferon gamma, and they also cause destruction of melanocytes. And this is just another one from the JAD, which shows the same thing, and therefore it shows that in future you may have treatment targets in vitiligo targeting the CXC receptors on the T cells, or we can target the CXCL10, we can target the JAK-STAT, or we can target the interferon gamma receptors or interferon gamma directly. So imagine how many more molecules might be available for management of vitiligo in future. What's the experience in vitiligo? Clinical evidence. Now there's a retrospective study. These are all small series of 10 consecutive patients with vitiligo treated with tofacitinib. These underwent treatment with tofacitinib, which was, the dose varied from 5 to 10 milligrams daily or twice a day. That means patient received up to 20 milligrams for an average of 9.9 months. A mean decrease of 5.4% body surface area involvement with vitiligo was observed in 5 out of 10 patients, which is not very impressive. But they showed here the individual patients and the areas which were affected, and some of the images that they've shared from the study, the patient before the treatment and patient after 5 months of treatment with 5 milligrams once a day. There's another prospective clinical trial involving 32 patients who were diagnosed with vitiligo. This came in the Gulf Journal of Dermatology. The patients were given 5 milligrams twice a day for 3 months. Efficacy was assessed through the score called VASI score. And they showed a steady decrease in VASI score going up to 4th follow-up and 5th follow-up, which was 8. The VASI score came down to 8 from a baseline of 25. And they showed that it's effective and safe because in their patients, adverse effects were seen in 21.9%, but most of these were mild and manageable. Upper respiratory infections, headache, nausea. And there was another 36-week open label non-randomized study which included 17 adult patients with vitiligo. Treatment was continued for 24 weeks, followed by 12 weeks follow-up of therapy. All but one experienced tofacitinib-induced repigmentation, 25% improvement in vitiligo area severity score at week 12. Acral VASI scored the least improvement, which is what we see with the other modalities of treatment. That means it does not score in difficult vitiligo, but where other medicines respond, we have one more molecule to manage such cases. And there was another study on ruxolitinib, which we should try and bypass. And I'll show you various studies which are being done with tofacitinib and ruxolitinib, both topical and systemic in vitiligo. Coming to JAK inhibitors in psoriasis. Where does it work? We know in psoriasis, the signals start from which are carried by dendritic cells to the naive T cells, which become activated into T helper cells, Th17, and which cause inflammation. And where does the JAK work? The interleukin 12 and 23 are both JAK-STAT dependent cytokines, which majorly serve as inflammatory mediators. So if you use JAK-STAT inhibitors, you could block the interleukin 23 signal, which would have led to Th17 activation and interleukin 17. Interleukin 23 stimulates Th17, we all know that, so this you could block. Interleukin 17 does not directly rely on the JAK-STAT, but indirectly by blocking 23, you can reduce the production of interleukin 17. So, well, this is what I told you. Let's avoid this crowded slide. And this is where, both STAT1, which causes, as we see here, stimulation of Th1 as well as Th17 cells, and STAT3 are responsible for, which is responsible for Th17 differentiation and also keratinocyte proliferation. So it affects both upstream and downstream. Upstream is what Dr. Amit told us, and downstream pathways and inflammatory cascade in psoriasis. What is the clinical evidence? Short-term treatment with oral tofacitinib results in significant clinical improvement in patients with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis. Here at week 12, PASI 75 response was seen with twice a day group, 5 milligrams. And when you use a higher dose, so in 5 milligrams, 40.8% showed PASI 75, but 66.7% was the higher dose, which we know is not very safe. And here is another one which showed through 2 studies, physician's global assessment as well as PASI, and which showed the 5 milligrams twice a day to be a fairly decent. In fact, if you see not comparative studies, this comes close to etanercept efficacy-wise, PASI 75. And there's another long-term 16 weeks treatment of patients with moderate to severe psoriasis. Physician's global assessment score went to 0 or 1, which is absent or minimally present disease. When you use the 10 milligrams, that was seen in 59.1% of patients. PASI 75, 10 milligrams, 59.6% of patients. And 10 milligrams twice a day was non-inferior to etanercept and superior to placebo, but of course that's not a dose that we normally use in psoriasis. It also showed improvement in nail psoriasis in another study. And these are some of the images from that study which shows the reduction in the NAPSI score. In an Asian study, 16 weeks duration of tofacitinib demonstrated efficacy versus placebo. 5 milligrams twice a day versus 10 milligrams, 5 milligrams twice a day, caused the physician global assessment response in 52.3% and PASI 75 in 54.6%. It was efficacy that was maintained through week 52. As we knew, there is no secondary loss of efficacy because there is no neutralizing anti-drug antibodies over here. And quality of life in pediatric patients, so it was used in pediatric patients because we saw in the juvenile idiopathic arthropathy, it can be used from the age of 2 years onwards. We have to remember the dose according to body weight there. And it was found to be safe. Short-term systemic treatment can cause reductions in circulating levels of inflammatory proteins and other proteins associated with cardiovascular risk. Minor decrease in blood lymphocyte counts and hemoglobin have been observed in patients with psoriasis who are treated with tofacitinib. We knew why, because of the effect of the hematopoietic system, but which is less with tofacitinib, which is more with ruxolitinib, because that works more on JAK2, which is more important. And there was no unexpected safety findings after 52 weeks of treatment. 2.2 to 4.5% of patients across the treatment groups experienced serious adverse effects. Coming to JAK inhibitors in alopecia areata. In alopecia areata also there's an immune mediated process. The hair follicle epithelium loses immune privilege and major histopathological complex expression happens on this, which attracts the T lymphocytes there, which get activated. We have activation of CD8 natural killer cell receptor D. So this cellular infiltrate, there's an increase in inflammatory mediators caused by it, most notably interferon gamma, interleukin 15, which causes recruitment of more interferon gamma, more inflammatory cells, and these cells ultimately damage the follicular epithelium, and that's how the hair is lost. The same thing being mentioned over here, loss of privilege, expression of MHC, attraction of the naive cells, activation of naive cells to the CD8, and the CD8 cells go and damage the follicle. And well, I think we have had enough theory, so we have to remember the cytotoxic CD8 cells as well as interleukin 15 mainly, as well as interferon gamma. Same thing, clinical evidence in alopecia areata. This is a study from Asia with 35 patients with the psoriasis scalp hair loss more than 50%, disease lasting for more than 6 months. All the patients were treated with a dose of 5 milligrams twice a day. Median duration of treatment was 7 months. It went on up to 24 months. The efficacy was judged by the SALT score, and it showed a total of 26 patients experienced more than 5% change in the SALT score, including 51.4% of patients achieving more than 50% hair regrowth over a 4 to 24 months period. 8 patients achieved 100% change in the SALT, that means total regrowth, after 10 months of therapy. And this is one of the images from that study. Of course, we all know that once you cause so much of regrowth, the challenge is how to withdraw the drug, because in most of the studies they show as you withdraw the drug, the hair which kept growing starts getting shed again. So we'll have to find how a minimum maintenance therapy can be given or some other treatment can be offered to sustain this growth of hair. Again, another study with 66 patients. It was a 2-center open-label single-arm trial using tofacitinib in alopecia areata involving more than 50% of scalp hair loss. Also, patients with alopecia totalis and universalis. These are patients who were recruited, and the dose given was 5 milligrams twice a day for 3 months. And they showed that some of them will have no response, intermediate response, and good response. And ophiacis patients improved better than totalis patients, who improved better than universalis patients. And this study showed relatively few side effects. And these were limited to grade 1 and grade 2 infections. Mild clinical infections that included paronychia and upper respiratory infections were seen in up to 25% of patients. So we should be observing these patients closely so that we can catch the red flags, and decide when to withdraw the drug. And there's another case report of a patient and patient's gradual improvement, and here's a regrowth. I'm sure this patient would love it. And there's another meta-analysis on alopecia areata. Owing to significant burden of alopecia areata and its effect on the quality of life, and we have a lack of therapeutic options for severe cases, there exists an unmet need for management of these patients. And JAK-STAT signaling pathway is an attractive target because it plays an important role in the pathogenesis of alopecia areata, as cytokines required for activation are dependent on the JAK-STAT pathway. Numerous case reports, case series, open-label studies of JAK inhibitors used for management of alopecia areata have been published, highlighting JAKs are a compelling target in this disease, and it may be in the long run an effective treatment option for alopecia areata. Coming to the last, atopic dermatitis. And here in atopic dermatitis, the Th2 cells are important, and Th2 cells release interleukin 4, which works through the JAK-STAT pathway. Interleukin, and it causes the various damages. I don't have to go into details. More important is also is supposed to release interleukin 31, and there are studies to show that the JAK inhibitors may block interleukin 31, and that gives rise to dramatic improvement in the pruritus. So this is a November 2019 study in the European Medical Journal. There's a systematic review which covered many studies involving topical and systemic JAK inhibitors in atopic dermatitis. Unfortunately, the complete studies are phase 1 and phase 2 data. Phase 3 are in process and not completed so far, therefore not available. Both topical and systemic usage causes reduction in the disease severity, marked and rapid reduction in pruritus score, sometimes within a day. So within a day after using the JAK inhibitors, you may have improvement in pruritus, which is marked and rapid. Aggregate findings, both the modes topical and systemic are safe and efficacious. Interleukin 4 uses JAK-STAT for signaling, and this interleukin 4 promotes Th2 differentiation, as we saw in the animation slide. Subsequent production of other inflammatory cytokines, all this can be blocked by the JAK inhibitors. And tofacitinib may suppress interleukin 31. So instead of using the biologics against interleukin 31, you may have an orally available, cost-effective molecule controlling pruritus. Short-term safety is acceptable, long-term safety is yet not known. So this is one thing we must remember, because you're treating diseases with no cure. So you have to use the molecule carefully and be aware of the side effects. Coming to the conclusions, evidence on the use of drugs targeting JAK and STAT pathway for the treatment of dermatological diseases such as atopic dermatitis, vitiligo, alopecia areata is growing, but still mainly focused on observational or early phase experimental studies. And although existing results are promising, further studies are needed to ensure the efficacy and safety parameters are optimal for the use in clinical practice on a routine basis. These clinical trial studies should provide more accurate results by improving their design, standardization of scales, and the time of outcome measures. Currently, there's a high therapeutic need for several skin diseases. JAK inhibitors as topical formulations or systemic drugs could be a very important weapon in our armamentarium. And again, we need more evidence before we can use it routinely. So we know now that these drugs are emerging as a new and effective treatment for various diseases. Initial results arouse enthusiasm and excitement. These drugs give us a potential to significantly advance treatment options, but further studies will decide about the real-world efficacy and safety profiles before we can use these in our daily routine practice. This is from Shilim. Thank you. With that, I come to the end of my talk.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. Now we have a lot of interesting questions, many questions which we have got. So I would request Dr. Tembe to please on his screen and be there. So we'll be taking one or two, we'll be taking one by one the questions. Well, Telyani sir, you gave us a lot of insight into how to use and everything. We have heard that you are using a lot of this molecule. So what is your personal experience
No,
been
I
so far,
have
sir?
so far used it only for, honestly speaking, I've only used for rapidly spreading unstable vitiligo cases where I
Okay.
combine this with phototherapy, since I got phototherapy options available with me. And I can tell you, my take is that it may not cause repigmentation as a solo drug, but it surely helps us prevent further spread in unstable vitiligo cases. And with that, if you use phototherapy, we also have another tool to cause repigmentation. That is how I'm satisfied with my choice of this molecule.
Okay, okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Dr. Tembe, we have got a question. When we use it for psoriasis or probably psoriatic arthritis, so once we start the drug, after how many days do we expect the action to happen? The arthritis, the symptoms getting down, or even the psoriatic patches clearing off? Because we have hardly used it, so you might be knowing about it, sir. So,
Yeah. So, as I said, although I highlighted so many adverse events, but it's a very safe and a smooth drug. It works very well for the psoriatic arthritis part. I mean, within 2 to 4 weeks, the patient uh, starts feeling better. The use for NSAIDs go down. I usually don't use steroids in this disease. So the requirement for NSAIDs is what tells us the response. The arthritis responds quickly. I don't think as it is it's an equivalent drug to secukinumab as far as the skin is concerned. So you have to combine it with something else. Something I usually combine it with 7.5 milligrams of methotrexate to cover the skin aspect. But for the joint, it's a wonderful drug. Within 4 to 6 weeks, you can expect a 70 to 80% response.
okay, great, sir. Sir, there are a couple of other questions also which have come. I think you have mentioned it in your presentation, but still we will take this question. Like, can this molecule, can it be combined with methotrexate, or can it be combined with say steroids or say a cyclosporin? So that's what in dermat we tend to do. We start with one molecule, then we use it for some time, we taper it off, we start with another molecule. So we are used to do doing these things. So can the same we did that be done? So can it be started with azathioprine or cyclosporin or methotrexate?
Yeah, so that is very important. When all the trials in RA have recommended tofacitinib to be used either as monotherapy or in combination with DMARDs like methotrexate, sulfasalazine, or leflunomide. But all the trials with psoriatic arthritis have used tofacitinib in combination. There is no recommendation to use it as monotherapy. But here one important aspect is the enzyme inducer part. So it is relatively contraindicated in combination with azathioprine and cyclosporin. Should be avoided with these two drugs. It can, in fact, it should be combined with methotrexate or sulfasalazine. Steroids, of course, is not a problem. NSAIDs and all can definitely be used. But the moment you start using tofacitinib, the need for NSAIDs and steroids immediately goes down.
Okay, okay, thank you. Telyani sir, there is one more question. So what is the safe age where it can be used? Can it be used in the pediatric? I think you have covered it, but we'll still like, sir, more clarification.
Off-label after you take a consent of the parents, because it's a pediatric age, so you have to take parents' consent.
Okay.
And if there's a compelling reason to use, supposing I see a patient with severe atopic dermatitis where cyclosporin is contraindicated or not working, and steroids cannot be used except for acute crisis, and methotrexate causes side effects, and if I had to use because the patient's quality of life is at stake,
right,
and we don't have the other molecules which we read about, interleukin 4 receptor antagonists,
yes,
and we don't have the topical crisaborole in India. Therefore, what you have to do is, if I have given such a dose, a patient, it has been said that the child should be at least 11 kilos. So Dr. Tembe may correct me, 11 to 20 weight group, you have to use 3.2 milligrams twice a day. And 21 to 40 kilos, you have to use 4 milligrams twice a day. And more than 40 kilograms, you have to use the same dose as adults, that is 5 milligrams twice a day. That's how you should use it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I guess the known devil's is better than an unknown one. So we'll still stick to our first lines of treatment. And if
yeah,
it
but
is
supposing
not, then
if all those are, you run out of it.
Yeah, we run out
And
of options.
You
then.
see so many of them with severe nummular dermatitis type of atopic, suffering immensely, adults.
Yes,
so I'm definitely, this is in my wish list now to use this molecule. when I've run out of the ideas.
Yes, yes, definitely, sir. There's one more question, like for during pregnancy, like if a female, she's like planning to get pregnant. So what is the like wash off period from the body? Like we know for methotrexate, it can be some 3 months or 3 cycles or something. So is there some washout period for this molecule from the body? So where the lady can become pregnant again?
Yeah, so the half-life is very short. As I said, one half-life is just 3.2 hours. So approximately we take about 5 half-lives for the drug to be completely washed out of the body. So anything more than 4 weeks is acceptable.
Okay.
But 3.2 or so, 4 half-lives will be actually less than a day.
Yeah, it should be ideal. But the half-life as seen in the clinical studies, I mean, the clinical effect lasts much longer. This is the biochemical half-life. So we get to see the effect on the cytokines and other parameters for as long as 3 weeks. So a safe bet would be something more than 4 weeks. Yeah.
Okay. So roughly a month's time should be a good option, like giving the patient.
Yeah.
And sir, is there some maximum duration till when it can be given? Say 6 months, 9 years, 1 year, 2 years, or is there something like a cumulative dose? So beyond which we do not give. This is one more question put forth by somebody.
Yeah. So as I said, tofacitinib is one of the most thoroughly studied drugs as far as clinical trials are concerned. Now, Pfizer has been very, very generous in continuing the extension studies for as long as 8 years. This has not happened with any other molecule in this stream. So none of the biologics have been studied more than 2 years. So we have long-term extension studies as long as 8 years. So we have safety data for as long as 8 years, and no unexpected safety signals apart from what I have already mentioned in my talk.
Okay. Great.
So 8 years we know from proper clinical trial data. And it has been in the market for more than a decade now. So,
okay. Yeah. And there's one more question. Like, suppose if a patient is taking this molecule for say 6 months, can it just be stopped all of a sudden, or it needs to be tapered off gradually or something like that? Like,
so it's a short-acting molecule. They have tried it. I mean, this pattern is seen more commonly with biologics because of the cost. At least in our scenario, people take it for 6 months, just stop it because they can't afford anything longer. So there has not been any problem with sudden stoppage of the medicine, but it has been seen that if you stop the drug and if there is a relapse, then the patient may not respond again in the same way as the patient might have responded in the first go.
Okay.
So that is a problem we see.
So I would like to say, from my point of view, I would not stop suddenly because of the fear of loss of efficacy, not because of any safety issues.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I would like this results to be sustained.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
And
I think we have to use the remission criteria, which is mentioned everywhere. The remission is anywhere in the range of 1 to 2 years. That is what we are aiming at.
Okay. Now, we as dermatologists, we believe a lot in topical therapy. So, Tailani sir, this molecule is available as a topical therapy also, right? So,
correct.
Is it available commercially or
no? Not really, but there's a company I know which is working on it. I spoke to a dispensing chemist, but my worry was if you make a 2% tofacitinib 100 grams ointment, that means you have to use 2 grams.
Okay.
That means imagine you have to use how many tablets? You have to use 400 tablets. Okay, and what is the cost of 400 tablets? Even with the generic version, so it will cost several thousand rupees. And if they don't do a good job, and if the drug is not bioavailable, it is not released from the ointment that they make it in, then it will be a waste.
Okay.
So we'll have to see how it can be made more affordable, because if you make it from the tablets, 5 milligram tablet, imagine. You need for 50 grams, you need 1 gram. So 1 gram is 200 tablets.
Okay. So, sir, it's not available as a ready-made molecule anywhere in any of the pharmas in India, sir?
Not really.
And
I know of a company I interacted with, they are working on it, and they may soon bring it for a few trials.
Okay.
That's what keeps you interested in the subject, you know.
Okay. Right. That is true.
Absolutely, because you have a few less roadblocks.
Yes, that is true. And then we've got one more question, like superficial bacterial infections, like pyodermas Or can this aggravate the sudden pandemic of tinea which is there? So can it make the tinea infections or bacterial infections worse? Like if it gives to, because it says one of the side effects is it aggravates infections or something like that. So there might be, is there a higher incidence of bacterial or fungal infections?
We have to wait and
It's
watch,
of-
probably with more usage.
Okay, because theoretically, yeah, it can happen like that.
I would be more concerned about tuberculosis.
Right.
So I would like to ask Dr.
cover
Tembe,
that-
since he has used much more than us, has he seen any patients showing reactivation of tuberculosis while being on the drug?
No, thankfully, no. So far, none. We do have strict screening criteria for latent TB. We follow it all the time. And if we follow those criteria, at least in my experience in the last 10 years, fortunately, so far, keeping fingers crossed, I have not come across any
So
reactivation.
even we screen, but
Neither with biologics.
Yeah, do you monitor also afterwards? After you screened and found it to be non-negative, while being on the drug, do you regularly screen again, monitor for tuberculosis, or you don't?
No, I don't repeat a MANTO, and neither do I repeat a TB Gold. I just watch clinically.
Right.
I don't think that makes sense, because what they recommend is reconversion of TB Gold or MANTO becoming positive after initially it was negative. In our situation, what we are worried about is reactivation. So when we see conversion of MANTO from negative to positive, it might still be a new infection, and that is not we are so much worried about. That will happen all the time in our country. What we are worried about is the reactivation, which usually happens in the initial 6 months. Fortunately, I've had no such incidents so far. And coming to the question on epidemic of tinea, it's not the tinea that we are worried about, but it's the drug interactions. Tofacitinib has drug interactions with fluconazole, with itraconazole and ketoconazole. So that should be taken care of. You might have to reduce the dose of tofacitinib if you intend to use these drugs for a longer time.
Okay.
Actually, 70% is metabolized by liver and 30% by the kidney excretion. And in 70% that is metabolized by liver, 3/4 is through cytochrome 3A4 and 25% is through 2D9. So any drug which works on both those cytochromes can interact with the drug. So you have to be aware of both the 3A4 as well as 2D9.
Right. So that's a very interesting point which Dr. Tembe has put. Rather than the tinea infections getting affected, so our itraconazole, which we use like water nowadays, so that should be a cause of concern, and its interaction with this molecule. That's again an important message. There's one more interesting question. Now, since this is a JAK inhibitor, so does it inhibit Jack Daniels? So somebody was saying that does it have any interaction with alcohol? So that's what people say. So that's an interesting question. So can it be had with alcohol or something?
I have to have a questionnaire for the patient. Yeah.
I think if the patients are very clear, they would miss the dose of the medicine on that day, but they'll not miss their Jack Daniels.
Therefore, they won't miss the
That's
Jack
what the
Daniels.
patients tell us.
That is true, sir.
Yeah.
Yes. That is true, sir. So I think we have covered most of the questions which are there. Bide madam, is there anything left which I've left? But
by Mutalik sir, he wants to know how do you compare JAK inhibitors with apremilast, like as far as the efficacy, safety, and the long-term usage is concerned.
From the theoretical knowledge that I have, apremilast is a very safe molecule. You don't have to do so much of monitoring, whereas this you have to do monitoring just like how you do for the biologics. It's a strong drug, as we all knew, not a homeopathic drug, which should be used with responsibility. But once, having said that, if the patient shows no intolerance and patient tolerates it well, I believe this will score over apremilast efficacy-wise, except for maybe psoriasis of the palms and soles or psoriasis of the body folds or scalp.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Just to add to that, apremilast, as far as skin is concerned, there has not been any head-to-head trial with apremilast. But as far as skin is concerned, apremilast may still be an effective option. But tofa gives an edge over the arthritis aspect as well. Apremilast may not be that effective for psoriatic arthritis. So if the patient has both the components, then definitely tofa scores way over apremilast.
So Dr. Tembe, when I heard you, I realized that for us it is like golimumab or it is like leflunomide, which works more for arthritis and less for skin. Probably this will be one
Yes,
such molecule, but probably it will not be so bad for skin. It will still be a little better than those two molecules when it comes to skin psoriasis.
I think 7.5 of methotrexate with tofa works wonders. It just clears the skin like anything and joint also. That has been my experience here.
Okay, so that's again a good practical tip which we are getting from sir. I think we are done. I think
Dr. Nitin wants to know whether tofacitinib can be combined with apremilast in patients of atopic dermatitis.
I think you should use one molecule first.
Yes.
With so many side effects that you know of, and if that doesn't work, then you should think of combining. But we have this concept of bhelpuri, little bit of this and little bit of that.
yes, yes,
We are good at
that
it.
is
So
true, sir.
probably you could use sequential one after other, but not as a combination. I believe I would not use it.
Yes.
So
Sir, I think
both
in-
are off-label
Yeah,
drugs,
yeah.
so, and better not.
Right,
Both
right.
are off-label drugs for this indication, so better not to combine.
Yeah, I think sir, the most promising indication in dermat would be those alopecia areata, which are like rapidly spreading, or like something like a person going into a totalis and all, where we have hardly any molecules, where we give cyclosporin and everything works. So I think this, whatever literature there, it holds a lot of promise in these particular patients. Tailani sir, your opinion?
I agree.
So-
More than psoriasis, if the psoriasis patient is arthritis or arthropathy, I'll use it. Or if I have a patient for 30 years and I've run out of all the options and patient cannot afford biologics all the time, I'll consider this. Otherwise, I'm actually looking forward to using the more difficult case of alopecia areata,
Right.
more difficult case of adult atopic dermatitis, where we are helpless sometimes. And I would also be using it for patients with rapidly spreading vitiligo, where I cannot use steroids, many oral pus all the time, and I'm not happy because of the side effects. And the azathioprine, because of the now the test which we used to do, TPMT test, is not being done because of the COVID test. Many labs have stopped doing TPMT tests
Okay. Okay.
because it does not enthuse them to keep a kit and invest in it because they're earning out of COVID.
Right.
And one question for Dr. Tembe. You said tofacitinib and 7.5 milligrams of methotrexate is very effective for psoriatics who have arthritis as well as skin disease. So how do you compare it with the combination of biologic and methotrexate versus tofacitinib and methotrexate? Like suppose you have to use like say secukinumab plus MTX, and if you want to use tofa and MTX, so what would be a better choice for the patient?
See, secukinumab is great for the skin, but not that useful for the joints, especially not for the spondylitis part. It may work for the peripheral arthritis, but not a great drug for the articular symptoms. Same is the case with methotrexate. Methotrexate, surprisingly, all of us have been using it for so many decades for psoriatic arthritis, but there is not a single RCT which has confirmed its efficacy in psoriatic arthritis. So I don't find methotrexate also an equally effective drug for arthritis. Doesn't work that well. It works very well for the skin. So we need something for the joints. If you are talking about psoriatic arthritis, for the joints, so far my choice was methotrexate with either leflunomide or sulfasalazine, which will work for both. Now, but with the advent of tofacitinib, methotrexate to me will take care of the skin part, and I need tofa for the joints.
Okay.
So it works well for spondylitis, axial skeleton also.
Axial ankylosing spondylitis, it has not been yet FDA approved, but for psoriatic spondylitis, it works well, yes.
Okay.
Great.
Now, last one more question, sir. Suppose now if I was one person, I've never used a biologic, and I need to start on psoriasis. I've got a choice of starting secukinumab or etanercept, or we have got this molecule on one hand. So if I want to use some molecule at the first, sir, what would be a good choice, like regarding the safety profile, cost, and everything, sir? For those persons who are really scared of using
how deep it will depend on how deep your pockets are.
Okay.
Before we had this generic of tofacitinib, all were at par. So if you talk only about efficacy, then if it is the skin, definitely Scafo scores over everything else. Nothing works as good as Scafo. But if there is psoriatic arthritis, then the choice is wide open. Then cost, I think, will determine the choice for me. Then tofacitinib in the range of 2K per month
Right.
is much better than any of the TNF blockers which are available to us, and certainly better than Scaphoria.
Okay.
And
Okay.
TNF
Great.
blocker etanercept works better in the dose of 50 milligrams twice a week for skin,
Correct.
and that dose is not cost effective. It becomes expensive then.
Yes.
Okay. So just last question: if the IPCA people are there, so how costly is this medicine? So like a 5 milligram tablet, like for those who don't know it, like for them, the cost is.
See,
Huh.
for
Monthly
me,
is
when yeah, please.
Sorry.
Yes, doctor.
Monthly it is 2,400. Yeah. MRP.
See, MRP
Okay.
for 60 tablets of 5 milligrams is 2,400 rupees from IPCA.
Okay.
And if the company provides directly, it can be brought down to 1,920 rupees also.
Okay.
1920.
Acha. Okay. So that's not. It's good, sir. Then.
Whereas Zelzans was 16,000 rupees for 60 tablets.
Right. Okay. So
and is it effective in nail dystrophy or the nail changes in psoriasis?
Yeah, as per the studies that I went through, it works well for the nail psoriasis also. And many times the nail psoriasis gives us a clue that these patients are likely to develop psoriatic arthropathy. So that way you will be able to help them from that point of view also.
Right. I think we have answered most of the questions, and we're way beyond the time. It's almost 10:30. So I thank you all. I thanks Dr. Tembe. I thank you, Dr. Tahiliani sir, for coming on this platform and giving us your inputs and valuable advice. So many take-home messages are there today. So thank you so much, sir.
I cut out 50 slides, but still had to show some studies at least for each indication.
Right. Absolutely right, sir. So thank you so much, sir. And thank you so much, the Pune branch of IIDVL, for taking this initiative. Well, before we sign off, there is just a moment. There is one more CME which we have that's scheduled on the 24th of Jan. Well, and all this Zoom and all, madam, I just forgot it. Where it's not visible.
Okay, you forgot it.
I know. I'm just looking at the share screen option, but it's gone somewhere.
खाली.
Yeah. हो तर सापडत नाही तो गेला कुठेतरी तो खूप विंडोज ओपन झालेल्या आहेत बट वी हॅव गॉट अ नाईस CME ऑन 24th. It's a Sunday in the morning. It's all about interesting clinical cases, so do join in. You will receive the links and all for it. Then ma'am, you'd like to say something before we sign off?
I would like to thank you all for having me on this platform.
Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Tembe Tahiliani sir. Yeah, we really enjoyed it, and I think after this, many of us will think of writing it, and we will definitely use this molecule judiciously, but we will use it because many people had inhibition using this molecule. So that is why we thought of having this CME, so that people have clear idea about monitoring and probably using it in the right indication after choosing the patients properly. So thank you, Dr. Tembe, because it was really useful. He has used it in many patients, so his practical experience will give us more confidence to use this one.
We learn from rheumatologists.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you again. Thank you, sir.
And thank you, IPCA Laboratories, for their support and the technical team for bleach-free webinar today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good night, ma'am.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amit, IPCA, Amit Dande. गेले का आपला
आहे मी
आहे हा.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good night.
थँक्यू सो मच
थँक्यू अमित. चांगलं झालं वेबिनार. किती
Yes,
लोक या
ऑलमोस्ट 188 लास्ट काउंट होता आणि 146 लॉग इन होते त्यात.
Very good.
अरे व्हेरी गुड. तुम्ही लिंक शेअर करणार ना आमच्याबरोबर रेकॉर्डिंगची?
हा मी लिंक शेअर मागून घेतो. रेकॉर्डिंग
आणि
शेअर
या कारण आमची वेबसाईट आहे त्याला आमचे हे जो आमचा वेबसाईट मॅनेजर आहे ना, he wants it in MP4 format. So if you can get it in MP4 format, that will be really good.
MP4 फॉर्मॅट. ओके,
Yeah.
मी विचारून घेतो.
विचारा, असेल तर दोन्ही मेल वरती पाठवा, वी ट्रान्सफर करून, सो दॅट वी कीप इट ऑन आवर वेबसाईट सो पीपल कॅन व्ह्यू इट वेन एव्हर दे वॉन्ट टू. है ना?
मॅम ती साईज केवढी मोठी आहे ते त्यावर डिपेंड आहे. MP4 ला साईज किती मोठी.
आम्हाला काही इश्यू नाहीये.
वेबसाईट वर अपलोड आणि प्लस मेल वर अटॅच होते का?
नाही, ते वी ट्रान्सफरनी होते, कारण आतापर्यंतच्या आमच्या ज्या झाल्या आहेत ना सगळ्या, त्याचे आम्ही घेतलेले 2.5-3 तासाच्या पण झालेले आहेत. तर ते हे झालंय, ते येतंय मेल वरती, तर ते पाठवायचा प्रयत्न करा. तुमची टेक्निकल टीम सांगेल ना तुम्हाला.
ओके ओके, मी बोलून घेतो.
सो थँक्यू मिस्टर आदित्य अँड थँक्यू अमित. चांगलं झालं आपलं. परत करू आपण अजून एखादा. सो आय विल लीव द मीटिंग ना.
या ओके मॅम.
ओके मॅम. ओके ओके मॅम.